theme is that God weeps for those who sin. The first reading, is taken from the book of Lamentations. It is written by Jeremiah in the year 586 BC, before Christ. And we've gone over this history, but just a little bit of a refresher. After King Solomon, Israel divided into two parts: the nation of Israel to the north, the nation of Judah to the south. In 721, Israel was conquered by the Assyrians and disappeared as a country. Judah, which is very small in comparison to Israel, but had Jerusalem as its center, continued. But it continued by having alliances with other kingdoms, thinking it was bigger and better than it really was, being impressed by the quantity of whom would be there instead of the quality of the faith they had inside. They worshipped other gods, gods of other countries, thinking that by worshiping these other gods, who looked incredibly nice with gold and silver, as opposed to a spirit god that was theirs, Jeremiah, among many prophets, spoke against this worship of other gods, telling them that it was only a matter of time before God would punish them. That punishment came the first time in 597, when a king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded Judah because it had rebelled against this enormous power. And he surrounded the city, eventually conquered the city. He took the king, Jehoiakim, and 10,000 of the leaders of the area, the nobles, the lawyers, the doctors, the architects, the scientists, and deported them all to Babylon. And the hope was that by basically taking away their leaders, it would be very unlikely that they would rebel again. On top of that, he took the king's uncle, Jehoiakim's uncle, whose name was Mattaniah, and put him on the throne. And to show this man that is Nebuchadnezzar, totally controlled Judah, he changed his name from Mattaniah to Zedekiah. And he couldn't even keep his own name, to say, I, the king of Babylon, the king of the world, control the world. Well, Zedekiah was a weakling. And the nobles behind his back began to make an alliance with Egypt. And then came to Zedekiah and said, look, we now have an alliance with Egypt, this great power. Together, we can defeat Babylon. Zedekiah, being foolish, allowed for a second rebellion to occur. Nebuchadnezzar, this time very angry, comes back with a huge army, and in 589 surrounds the city of Jerusalem. Egypt came up to try to rescue Judah, but they defeated the Egyptian army. And it took them 2 years to break into the walls of Jerusalem. When they finally did, they destroyed the city. They completely destroyed the Temple of Solomon, so that not one stone rested upon another. They captured the king, Zedekiah, trying to escape towards Jericho, dressed as a woman. They brought him back, tied him to a pole, executed each of his children in front of him, and then took a hot red poker and poked out both of his eyes, put him in chains, and led him off to Babylon with another 4,600 people in exile. The nation of Judah disappeared. The kingdom of David, which they thought would last forever, was gone. And Jeremiah, for having told the people that they would be punished by Babylon, by their sins, he was hated. He was arrested. He was tortured. He was flogged. He was put in a cistern, hoping he'd die, but he lived. And Jeremiah now, after the city has fallen, after the city is destroyed, is looking out at the city, and he laments, he cries over what has happened to Judah. The book of Lamentations is sometimes called the book of tears, because Jeremiah cried when looking at the city, what was left of it. All because the people would not listen. If only they had just simply remained Judah, had simply worshiped the one true God, had not tried to be pumped up with pride and try to conquer a nation that was many, 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 many times larger, they would still have their temple. They would still be in Jerusalem. But now they were not. They were in bondage in Babylon. How often are we, again, so impressed with physical power? We're impressed with physical things. I think I've said this many times before. You know, if you're ever invited to a house and it's grand, it's huge, you know, you're, oh, thank you for inviting me. And how many times, you know, are we impressed with people where, you know, we go, there's some people who would join a rich church simply because they wanted to make business relationships with people there. The power came to that church. So they came not because they believed, but because they wanted these business connections, or because they didn't feel important. And so they came to an important church where they might meet important people and be invited to their important homes. And so they look like they have a lot of faith, but they really don't. They're really pretty empty. Well, you know, that is basically what Jesus is saying. You know, increase our faith, say the apostles. Again, thinking that the bigger the faith, the better. And what Jesus is telling them, it's not quantity, it's quality. It's not how big your faith is, it's how genuine your faith is. You know, if you come here to church and worship God, and then go out there into the real world and cheat your fellow neighbor, if you come in here and profess your love to God, but then go out there and have an affair against your partner, well, you know, then you really don't believe. Your belief is very empty. And God is wanting them to, Jesus is wanting them to reflect on that. And then he has this thing which was very hard to read and probably equally hard to hear about, you know, if your slave comes out of the field, you know, what do you say? Oh, hey, welcome, come on, sit down at the table with me and have dinner. No, he'd say, hey, get my meal. Well, of course, he's talking to a different generation, but what it really means is, why are you good? Why do you do the right thing? And the answer is because it's good for you. Morality is based upon experience. You know, to do what is right is actually good for you. To do what is wrong is actually bad for you. I've told you many times before that I was director of 2 counseling services, one in Albany, New York for 17 years and one in Princeton, New Jersey for 25. And I would frequently have someone come to see me who's having an affair. And I'm dressed as a priest as I am now. And, you know, they're probably expecting, you know, that I'm going to tell them they're a sinner, you know, and hit them over the head with the Bible. But basically, I would help them begin to think. You know, okay, all right, you're having an affair. How's it going? And they begin to say, you know, sheepishly that, you know, well, they're having a lot of sex. And I would say to them, well, okay, continue. But they would begin to realize that because they weren't really committed to their spouse, they're not that committed to the person they're having the affair with. And because their love is sort of split in 2 different parts, it really can't grow. It's really not enough to be nourished. It's too weakened. It's too watered down. And And they don't have any real depth of love. And because they don't have that depth of love, they suffer. Their quality of love is poor, even though they have a quantity of 2 people. And so cheating on your spouse, on your partner, is really cheating on yourself. By the same token, remember when you were children, and I was famous for this, you'd come home from school and you'd eat like 16 cookies or something, and your mother would tell you, don't do that because it's going to ruin your appetite. And maybe, if your parents would spank you if you did the wrong thing, you were scared of them, so you did the right thing and didn't eat the cookies. But if only they sat down, which parenting is really being trained to do today, and to say, guess why I don't want you to eat those cookies? That somehow you're going to be taking in too many calories. You're going to be taking in too many bad calories. You're not going to be then willing to eat the good food with the nutrients that you need. Therefore, it's going to hurt you to do the wrong thing. When you lie, people no longer trust you. To lie is to begin to die. Your word is your honor, your guarantee. If I say something to you that I'm going to do it, I do it, no matter what. And therefore people can trust me. But if they can't trust you, and people pull away from you, that's your punishment. And so Jesus is saying that to these apostles, is that the reason that you are good is because it is good for you. If you do something that is defined as a sin, it actually detracts from who you are. It shrinks who you are as a person. So please, please don't do that. And then we come to the last reading that was written from Paul to Timothy. This reading was written in the year 67 A.D., Anno Domini. And Paul is arrested again, this time for the last time. He's in a prison now, not house arrest, but in an actual prison in Rome. And he's been sentenced to death. Because he's actually a Roman citizen, he's being given the mercy of a quick death, which will be beheaded, as opposed to being crucified, which is a slow death. Not that, lucky me, I'm going to be beheaded. But the point here is that Paul, he's writing this as his last letter to the person who has become so close to him, he considers him a son, Timothy. Timothy must have known that and probably read this letter over and over and over again. I had a card my father gave me once the year he died, and I was only 14, and he told me how much he loved me in the card, and I kept that until that card rotted. I'm sure Timothy revered this letter too. And what he's telling him in this letter is that, Paul, I'm in jail, I'm suffering, I'm going to be beheaded, and I'm doing it all because I did the right thing, because I told the truth, because I told that there is a Jesus Christ who did rise from the dead. I'm not willing to say it was a lie. And therefore, I'm going to pay the ultimate penalty, my life. And then Paul, being who Paul was, is also addressing some of the problems that Timothy is having. Timothy, as I've told you, had sort of a baby face, and therefore people sometimes didn't respect him. He was also very shy, very timid, didn't want to speak up. And Paul was always encouraging him to speak up, so much so that he made him bishop of Ephesus. And in Ephesus, which is where this letter comes to, Timothy, he's telling him some things about, okay, if you really love one another, what does that mean? And the one thing it means is that if there's a widow in the congregation, in your parish, and she's over 60, and she doesn't have family to take care of her, the church should take care of her. The belief was that if she's younger, probably she might be able to remarry, but, now that I'm 73, you can imagine, at 60, it's like, well, too late, it's over with. And so, no luck, you're ever going to get married again. So, better take care of that person. But it's, in other words, please take care of those that need to be taken care of. And then he's saying to people who have money, and there are plenty of people in Ephesus who had money, is that, don't hoard your money. To those to whom much is given, much is demanded. There are plenty of people today who have so much money that they have multiple homes, that they have multiple cars, that they take, they go places over and over again that you and I will never be able to come near. And the thought is, of course, well, it's nice to have money. Couldn't that money be put to a better use? It's not that we expect that person not to live a decent life, but, do they have to have 4 or 5 houses? No. So therefore, is it possible that you might want to share as opposed to hoard your money? And lastly, he says, there's these people, these false teachers in Ephesus. And they're saying that, yes, when you die, you'll be resurrected. You'll go to another life as a spirit. And Paul is saying, no, we're human beings. We're body and soul. So that therefore, when you and I die and rise to a life in heaven, we're not rising as a ghost. We're rising as a human being, body and soul. You will have hands and feet and skin, except that it will no longer age. It will no longer be subject to illness. You will no longer suffer. That is the kind of resurrection you're going to have. So Paul is helping Timothy, who then has been crying over the people of Ephesus who are not sometimes listening to him. Just as Jesus was crying for those people like the Pharisees who weren't listening to him. The Pharisees who would say, I have great faith, and I, in front of the congregation, now give my tithe, my 10% to the synagogue. Because I'm more important than you, who obviously don't give as much. And then Jesus tells that story of the little old lady in the back who gives 1 penny, but that's like 1/10 of what she has. But she gives it because she really means, she cares. And so she's more important than the Pharisee. So Jesus weeps for that Pharisee. And of course, Jeremiah weeps for the people of Judah because of their lack of faith, which has caused them to now have a lack of a nation. So while Jeremiah weeps for Judah, while Jesus weeps for the Pharisees, while Timothy weeps for the people of Ephesus, the point is, God does not want to weep for you. Therefore, you and I are still alive. You and I are still making those choices to grow. And God wants you to grow to full happiness, full maturity. God loves you. And therefore, if you pick the wrong path, if you choose to do wrong, if you choose to do evil, if you shrink because of those choices, God weeps.
Amen. Amen.